Aggregate expenditure for a two-sector economy comprising household sector and producing sector, it is the summation of desired consumption expenditure C and desired investment expenditure I. Aggregate output, it is the planned output of an economy in a given period of time. अब Keynesian cross, intersection point of aggregate expenditure है, aggregate output is known as Keynesian cross. At this point the economy is in equilibrium. Equation for equilibrium GDP, y is equal to alpha plus I naught over I 1 minus beta. Here alpha is autonomous consumption, I naught autonomous investment, beta is marginal propensity to consume. A classical view on saving investment identity. Classical economists asserted that there is an obvious identity between saving and investment because both saving and investment depend on the market rate of interest, which in a free market economy is assumed to be perfectly flexible. By ex ante saving and investment, it refers to planned saving and investment. By ex post saving and investment, it refers to realized or actual saving and investment. By paradox of thrift, it refers to a situation when increase in propensity to save ultimately results in lesser saving than before. A movement before along the AE line, it refers to change in the aggregate expenditure AE consequent upon the change in real income as reflected on the same AE line. A shift in the aggregate expenditure line. A shift in the AE line occurs when there is a change in aggregate expenditure corresponding to a given level of real national income. A marginal propensity to expenditure. It is the rate of change in aggregate expenditure to change in GDP. अब MPE is equal to delta AE upon delta Y. It represents slope of the AE line. Parallel shift of AE line. If the change in aggregate expenditure at different levels of output is the same, new AE line is parallel to the initial one. Here MPE is same along the two AE lines. A non-parallel shift of AE line. If the change in aggregate expenditure at different levels of output is different, new AE line is not parallel to the original one. Here MP is different along the two AE lines. Causes of a change in equilibrium GDP in a two-sector economy. Equilibrium GDP changes due to change in consumption expenditure or due to change in investment expenditure or both. Multiply, it refers to the ratio of change in income to the changes in investment expenditure, that is k is equal to delta y by delta I. Here k multiply delta y is equal to change in income and delta I is equal to change in investment. A very relationship between MPC, MPS and K. There is direct relationship between MPC and K and inverse relationship between MPS and K. Thus K is equal to 1 over 1 minus MPC is equal to 1 over MPS. A very reverse operation of multiplier, as an injection of investment causes multiplier times increase in income. Similarly, a withdrawal of investment causes multiplier times decrease in income. ठीक है. अब लीकेज ऑफ मल्टीप्लायर. First is savings, second है purchases of shares and government securities, third है payments of old debts, fourth है imports, fifth है excess stock of consumption goods, sixth है high liquidity preference, seventh है inflation, eighth है taxation, अब है ninth है undistributed profits. अब criticisms of multiplier. The theory of multiplier is more like a between investment and income mechanical relationship. Second है Keynesian concept of multiplier contradicts with his own concept of an obvious equality between saving and investment. Third है it is a tautological concept as it repeats an obvious relation between investment and income in different ways. Fourth, a relation between consumption and income not so simple as assumed in the theory of multiplier. Fifth, the theory of multiplier ignores the effect of acceleration. Sixth, the theory of multiplier is based on a questionable assumption of perfectly elastic supply of consumer goods. Fiscal policy. It is a policy related to revenue and expenditure of the government with a view to achieving the broad objectives of price stability, economic growth, etc. A government expenditure function. It studies the relationship between government expenditure and the level of real GDP. फिर है government tax function. It studies the relation between government taxes and the level of real GDP. अब है budget surplus, public saving function. It measures the relationship between public saving and real GDP. Public saving is the difference between government tax revenue and government expenditure. अब है equation for equilibrium GDP. Y is equal to alpha plus I naught plus G naught over 1 minus beta. Y is equal to alpha minus beta t plus I naught plus G naught over 1 minus beta. Of a private saving, it is the income less direct taxes and consumption expenditure for all the individuals in the economy. Domestic saving, it is the sum of public saving and private saving. Okay, about domestic saving function, it studies the relationship between domestic saving and level of real GDP. About government expenditure multiplier KG, it is the ratio of change in real GDP delta Y to change in government expenditure, that is KG is equal to delta Y over delta G is equal to 1 over 1 minus beta. Government tax multiplier KT, it is the ratio of change in real GDP to change in tax revenue, that is KT is equal to delta Y over delta T is equal to minus beta over 1 minus beta. Balance budget multiplier, it is the ratio of change in real GDP delta Y to change in balance budget expenditure, delta G is equal to delta T, that is KBM is equal to delta Y over delta G is equal to delta Y over delta G plus delta Y over delta T is equal to 1 minus 1 over beta plus minus B over 1 minus beta is equal to 1. अब causes of shift in AE, first है change in consumption expenditure, second है change in investment expenditure, third है change in government expenditure, fourth है change in tax rates. Trade policy, it is the policy of the government with reference to export and import of a country. अब export function, it studies the relationship between export and the level of real GDP. अब import function, the function relationship between imports and the level of real GDP is known as import function. Where marginal propensity to import, it is the ratio of change in import to change in real GDP, that is M is equal to delta M over delta Y. Net export function, it studies the function relationship between net exports, export minus import, and the level of real GDP. A movement along the net export function. Movement along the net export function occurs when we move from one point to the other point. Along the net export function, it occurs due to change in real GDP. A shift in the net export function, it factors if factors other than GDP that affects net exports change, net export function shifts upward or downward. A parallel shift of net export function, if there are uniform changes in factors that affect the net exports function at all levels of GDP, the new net export function emerges to be parallel to the initial one. A non-parallel shift of net export function, if changes in factors affecting the net exports are not uniform at different levels of GDP, the new net export function would not parallel to the initial one. अब factors causing shift in net export function, पहले foreign real national income, second है relative international price level, third exchange rate. अब aggregate expenditure in an open economy, it is the sum total of consumption, investment, government expenditure and net export of the economy, that is A is equal to C plus I plus G plus XIM minus M. अब equation for equilibrium GDP in an open economy, Y is equal to alpha plus I naught plus G naught plus X naught minus M over alpha 1 minus beta, or Y is equal to alpha plus I naught plus G naught plus X naught minus beta into T over 1 minus beta plus M with government tax and import function. Total asset formation of the economy, it is the sum of investment and net export, that is I plus X minus M. Foreign trade multiplier, it is the ratio of change in real GDP to change in export, that is KFT is equal to delta Y over delta X is equal to 1 over 1 minus beta plus M. Short run in macroeconomics, it is a time period when most input prices are stable at some predetermined level, where price variation and aggregate expenditure is inversely related with the price level. With fall in the price level, E line shifts upward and vice versa. Where demand induced changes of GDP, changes in GDP due to a change in aggregate expenditure or aggregate demand is known as demand induced changes. away inside asset. If the issuer and holder of an asset are from one sector or from one country, such an asset is known as inside asset. Away outside asset. If the issuer and holder of an asset are from different sectors of different countries, such an asset is known as outside asset. Aggregate demand AD curve, it is the locus of different combinations of price level and real GDP which equate aggregate expenditure and aggregate output of the economy. A movement along the AD curve. A movement along the AD curve occurs due to change in the price level. Slope of AD curve, it measures the change in the level of GDP as a result of change in the price level. Aggregate demand shock. Shifting of AD curve due to exogenous expenditure is known as aggregate demand shock. It may be positive or negative. Due to the positive demand shock, AD curve shifts upward, and due to negative demand shock, AD curve shifts downward. Factors responsible for aggregate demand shocks: change in monetary policy, change in fiscal policy. Measures the magnitude of horizontal shift of AD due to a change in the exogenous spending. Aggregate supply, it refers to the total quantity of goods and services that all firms in the economy are intending to produce and supply at a given level. Slope of AS curve, it measures the change in the level of GDP as a result of a change in the price level. The short run aggregate supply curve SRAS is positively sloped. Factors affecting slope of SRAS curve: first, a change in the unit cost; second, a change in the general price level; the third, a change in the real input prices. When macroeconomic equilibrium, it refers to the equilibrium values of real GDP and price levels simultaneously determined by the intersection of AD and SRAS curves. Keynesian SRAS curve. If all the prices are fixed in the short run, SRAS curve is parallel to x-axis. This horizontal SRAS curve is popularly known as Keynesian SRAS curve. Shifts in RAS curve due to change in the factors other than the price level is known as aggregate supply shock. Factors responsible for supply shock: input price flexibility, factor productivity. The conditions of macroeconomic equilibrium: desired expenditure must be equal to aggregate output. The condition holds good at any point of ED curve. Second, producers must produce the prevailing level of national output at a given price level. This condition holds good at any point of SRAS curve, where aggregate demand shocks and its impact on GDP and price level. With positively slope SRAS curve, an aggregate demand shock causes price level and GDP to move in the same direction. In case of horizontal SRAS curve, an aggregate demand shock causes GDP to move in the same direction. Price level remains constant. Corresponding to vertical segment of SRAS curve, an aggregate demand shock causes price level to move in the same direction. GDP remains constant. Aggregate aggregate supply shocks and its impact on GDP and price level. An aggregate supply shock causes the price level and output to move in the opposite direction, stagflation. Due to negatively supply shocks, SRAS curve shift to the level causing higher prices and lower GDP. This situation in the economy is known as stagflation. Price variation and multiplier effect. The multiplier effect of exogenous spending allowing price variation is less than the multiplier effect when prices are assumed to be constant.